Damien Valenti didn't even flinch when he did it. That was the part Celeste couldn't stop thinking about afterward, not the woman's laughter, not the hand resting on her husband's chest, not even Damien's face when he leaned in close. It was the fact that he looked completely at ease, relaxed, like a man with nothing to hide because he had already decided he didn't have to. Celeste stood in that doorway for 11 seconds. She counted them later, lying in a hotel room she'd paid for in cash, staring at a ceiling she didn't recognize. 11 seconds of watching the man she had protected, covered for, and quietly loved for 14 years choose someone else without hesitation. She didn't cry, she didn't speak. She simply turned around, picked up her keys from the entry table, and walked back out into the night. And somewhere between the front door and the end of the driveway, Celeste Hayes made a decision that would change everything. If this story already has you feeling something, stay with us. Subscribe to this channel so you don't miss what happens next. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling us what city or country you're watching from. We want to see exactly how far this story travels. The night Celeste came home early, she hadn't planned to. She had been at her sister's place across the city, a dinner that ran long, wine she hadn't meant to drink, conversation that stretched past 10 o'clock before either of them noticed. When she finally said goodbye and drove back through the north side of Chicago, the roads were quiet and the air had that particular November bite that gets into your coat no matter how good the coat is. She didn't call ahead. She rarely did anymore. Damien's schedule was unpredictable at best, and she had stopped trying to sync her movements with his sometime around year 8 of the marriage. It wasn't resentment, not exactly. It was adaptation. The kind of quiet adjustment a person makes when they've accepted that their life runs alongside someone else's rather than with it. The house was lit from inside. That should have told her something. Damien usually killed the main lights when he had business at the house. He hated what he called unnecessary brightness, which really meant he preferred darkness because it made things harder to see. But the living room windows were warm and yellow, and there was music. Something low and slow coming from inside, bleeding faintly through the glass. Celeste parked in the side drive the way she always did. She unlocked the side entrance because the keypad on the main door had been giving her trouble for a week, and she hadn't gotten around to asking anyone to fix it. Small domestic irritation. The kind of thing that piles up quietly when both people in a marriage have stopped paying attention to the shared parts of it. She set her bag on the bench inside the hall. She pulled off her coat. She was already thinking about whether there was anything left in the kitchen she could eat without cooking it. The laughter reached her before she reached the living room. It was a woman's laugh light, unguarded, the kind of sound a person makes when they're completely comfortable where they are. Celeste stopped walking. Her first thought, genuinely, was that one of Damien's associates had brought a wife or a girlfriend by for some reason. It happened sometimes. Men from the organization who wanted to seem legitimate, who brought women to meetings to soften the atmosphere or blur the edges of what was really being discussed. So she rounded the corner expecting to see 2 or 3 people. What she saw was 2. Damien was on the couch she had chosen, in the room she had decorated, with a woman Celeste had never seen before. The woman's shoes were off. Her feet were tucked up under her like she owned the place. Damien had his arm along the back of the couch, not on the woman's shoulder, just stretched out, easy, the way a man sits when he is completely without tension. He was laughing, too, a quiet laugh, private, the kind Celeste used to hear from him in the early years. She stood in the doorway. She counted 11 seconds. Damien never looked up. Celeste walked back down the hall, picked up her bag and her coat, and let herself out through the side door. She sat in her car in the driveway for a few minutes. The engine wasn't running. She didn't start it right away. She was trying to locate the feeling inside herself, the grief, the rage, the shock, something she recognized. But what she found instead was something quieter, a kind of settling. The way a building sounds when it's finally stopped shifting and just accepts the crack in the foundation. She started the car. She drove. She didn't go to her sister's. She didn't call anyone. She found a hotel 20 minutes from the house and paid cash at the front desk, and the young man behind the counter didn't ask her anything because she looked like a woman who knew exactly what she was doing, and that, she thought, was a performance she had been giving for a very long time. Celeste Hayes had not always been the kind of woman who went quiet. She had grown up loud, opinionated, direct, The kind of girl who argued with teachers, not because she was difficult, but because she thought things through and wasn't afraid to say so. Her mother had called it stubbornness. Her father had called it courage and meant it as a compliment. She had met Damien Valenti when she was 26. She had known what he was within 3 months. She wasn't naive about it. She had grown up on the West Side. She understood the city's architecture, the way money and violence lived alongside ordinary life in certain neighborhoods without advertising themselves. She knew what Damien's name meant before he ever told her directly. What she hadn't known, what she couldn't have prepared herself for, was how much she would come to love him, despite it. Not because of the power, not because of the money, though the money was real and she wasn't going to pretend otherwise. She loved him because in those early years, Damien had looked at her the way very few people ever had, like she was the most interesting thing in the room. Not the most beautiful, not the most useful, the most interesting. Like her mind was worth his full attention. She married him knowing the risks. She told herself she could manage it. She had been right about that, mostly. She was good at managing things. What she hadn't anticipated was the gradual disappearance of being seen. It happened slowly, it always does. The full attention became partial, then occasional, then mostly absent. Business consumed him. She learned to move around his edges. She stopped expecting him to show up for the small things dinner. On time, a phone call returned, an anniversary remembered without prompting. She stopped being disappointed by the silences, because disappointment requires a certain energy she had redirected into other things. She had friends. She had her own interests. She realized now in this hotel room, quietly built an entire interior life that Damien had no access to because he had never thought to ask. She lay on top of the covers and looked at the ceiling. She was not thinking about the woman on the couch. She was thinking about 11 seconds and about what it meant that her first instinct had not been to fight or demand or break something, but simply to leave. She stayed in the hotel for 2 nights. On the 3rd morning, Damien called her cell 7 times before she answered. She let it ring out 6 times because she wanted to understand the sound of him wanting something he couldn't control. The 7th time, she picked up. "Where are you?" Not a question. The way he said it, flat and certain, like the answer was already his. "I'm fine," she said. "Thank you for asking." A pause. "Celeste." "What? Come home. We need to talk, do we?" She was sitting at the small desk in the hotel room, drinking coffee from a paper cup. The coffee was bad. She drank it anyway, because from where I was standing, it looked like you had company. I didn't want to interrupt. Another pause. Longer this time. She could hear him exhale. It's not what you think. "Damien." Her voice stayed flat. "I was standing in the doorway. I saw what I saw, please. Don't talk to me like I'm one of your people who needs to be managed." Silence. She waited. "How long were you there?" he asked. "Long enough." He said her name again. Quieter this time. There was something in it, something that could have been contrition, or could have been the practiced softness of a man who understood how to use his voice as a tool. She had spent 14 years learning the difference between those two things in him, and even now she wasn't entirely certain which one this was. "Come home," he said. "Not yet," she said. She hung up. She finished the bad coffee. She ordered breakfast from the hotel's room service menu. She sat at the window while she ate and watched the street below and thought, without drama, about what came next. She went back to the house on day 4. Not because Damien had convinced her. He had called twice more, and she had answered neither. She went back because it was her house too, in the technical sense, and because she had things there she needed, and because running from a problem had never been her style. She arrived at 10 in the morning when she knew Damien would be out. She was wrong. He was in the kitchen when she walked in, standing at the counter with a coffee that looked like it had been sitting there long enough to go cold. He was wearing the same shirt he wore when he didn't plan to leave. He hadn't shaved. Damien Valenti, who ran an organization built on the appearance of absolute control, looked like a man who had not slept in 3 days. She set her bag on the counter across from him. They looked at each other. "You want to tell me what's going on?" she said. Not accusatory. Just direct. "It wasn't anything serious," he said. She almost laughed. It sat in her throat, and she swallowed it. "That's your opening?" "I'm trying to, Damien." She put both hands flat on the counter. "Don't explain it to me like I'm supposed to calibrate how angry to be based on how serious it was. That's not how this works." He looked at her. Something moved across his face that she couldn't name. "What do you want me to say?" he asked. "I don't want you to say anything yet. I want you to listen." She kept her voice even. This was the voice she had learned over 14 years, the one that didn't shake, that didn't rise, that communicated exactly what she meant without giving him anything he could grab onto and reframe. "I came home and I saw what I saw. I'm not here to have a fight about it. I'm here to get some things and to think about what I want to do." "What you want to do," he repeated it slowly, like he was translating a language. "Yes, Celeste." He moved toward the side of the counter. She didn't step back, but she didn't close the distance either. "I made a mistake. I know that." Don't finish that sentence," she said. He stopped. "Don't tell me it won't happen again," she said. "Don't make me a promise right now, because anything you say to me right now, I will not believe it. Not because I've already decided something, but because trust isn't rebuilt in a kitchen conversation. 4 days after I watched you with another woman in our living room." She picked up her bag. "I'm going to get what I need from upstairs. I'll be back down in a bit." She walked out of the kitchen. She heard him say her name once quietly to the room she had already left. She took her time upstairs. She wasn't trying to make a point, she just moved deliberately, choosing what she needed rather than grabbing everything in a panic. Extra clothes, her laptop, the small box she kept in the back of the closet that had her documents, her own accounts, a few things that were only ever hers. She had started that box 3 years ago, not because she had been planning to leave. She had done it because she was a practical woman, and practical women keep certain things organized, separate, accessible. At the time, she had told herself it was just good sense. Standing in the closet now, she wondered what her body had known before her mind was ready to admit it. She came back downstairs. Damien was still in the kitchen, still standing. He hadn't moved to the table. He hadn't made new coffee. He was just standing there like a man waiting for a verdict he wasn't sure he deserved to hear. She stopped at the edge of the kitchen doorway. "I'm going to stay at my sister's for a while," she said. "For how long?" "I don't know. I want you here." "I know you do." She looked at him directly. "But what you want isn't the only thing that matters here. It's taken me a while to fully internalize that, but I have." He put both hands on the back of a chair, gripping it. Damien Valenti, who had stared down men who carried weapons into rooms, who had sat across from federal prosecutors, without blinking, gripping a kitchen chair like it was keeping him upright. "I love you," he said. Simple, no performance in it. She felt it. She wouldn't pretend she didn't. 14 years don't disappear because you want them to. "I know," she said. She picked up her bag. She walked to the door. "Celeste." His voice came from behind her, rougher this time. "Don't I'm asking you not to make any decisions yet. Please." She paused at the door. She didn't turn around. "I haven't made any decisions," she said. "That's actually the most honest thing I can tell you right now." She left. Her sister Elena's apartment was on the 4th floor of a building on the north side that Damien had offered to buy for her twice, and that Elena had refused twice with language that had made Damien briefly reconsider his position on women in his organization. Elena's 3 years younger than Celeste, smaller, louder, and had hated Damien Valenti from the moment she met him without apology or qualification. She had said once that she didn't hate him because of what he was. She hated him because she could see what he was doing to her sister, and he did it so gradually that Celeste kept thinking it wasn't happening. When Celeste knocked on the door with her bag over her shoulder, Elena took one look at her and stepped back to let her in without saying a word. She got Celeste settled in the spare room. She ordered food because she knew Celeste wouldn't eat if someone didn't put something in front of her. She sat across the small table and waited while Celeste ate half a container of soup and stared at nothing. "Do you want to talk about it?" Elena said. "Not yet." "Okay." I walked in and he was with someone. Elena's jaw tightened. But she was watching her sister, so she kept her voice level. "Okay?" He didn't look guilty, Elena. He wasn't hiding. He was just there, like it was normal. "What'd you do left?" Elena nodded slowly. "You didn't say anything." "No." And now Celeste set down the spoon. She looked at her sister across the table. "I don't know what now looks like yet. I'm trying to figure that out." Elena was quiet for a moment. Then, for the record, "I'm not going to tell you what to do. That would be a first. I mean it. This is your life, and I'm not going to be another person who decides things for you." She paused. "I will say one thing." "What?" "You look more like yourself right now. than you have in about 3 years. Celeste didn't answer. She picked up the spoon and finished the soup. The calls kept coming. Not constant, Damien had enough sense not to become desperate in that way. But steady. Once in the morning, once in the evening. Sometimes a text. Nothing manipulative, nothing threatening. Just his name on her screen and the question underneath it of what she was going to do. She answered when she felt like it. Sometimes every day. Sometimes not for 2 or 3 days. The calls told her things she was paying attention to. He wasn't sending people to check on her, she would have known. He wasn't making her feel watched, which she'd expected, because Damien's default mode, when he felt things slipping, was control. He wasn't doing that. Or he was working very hard not to, which meant he understood the stakes in a way she hadn't counted on. That complicated things slightly. She had prepared herself for a version of him that came in with leverage, with pressure, with the quiet weight of everything she'd accepted in the marriage being used to pull her back. She had her answers ready for that Damien. She didn't quite have her answers ready for a man who simply kept calling once in the morning and once at night and didn't demand anything. She started going through her finances during those 2 weeks. This was not dramatic. It was methodical. Celeste had always been the one who tracked the household accounts, not the organization's money. She had kept herself carefully separate from that because she was not stupid, but the personal accounts, the house expenses, the things that made up the daily texture of their shared life. She knew exactly what was there and what was hers. What surprised her was how much she had never asked for in her own name. She had money. She had some put away in accounts that were entirely separate from anything connected to Damien. Enough to matter. She had a business degree she hadn't used in 12 years. She had contacts outside the Valenti world people she had maintained relationships with because something had always told her to keep at least one foot in a life that was entirely her own. She sat in Elena's spare room one afternoon, with all of it spread out in front of her documents, account statements, a legal pad with notes in her own handwriting, and she thought, this is not someone who was trapped. That was a different kind of revelation. She had not been a prisoner. She had not been controlled in the obvious ways. She had made choices each year to recede a little further, to ask for less, to become quieter, smaller, easier to overlook. She'd made those choices so gradually that she hadn't noticed doing it until there was nothing left of the loudest parts of herself. That made her angry in a way that Damien's infidelity on its own couldn't quite reach. Not at him, at herself, and then eventually, carefully, at what the marriage had asked her to become. She called a lawyer on a Tuesday. Not to file anything. She was not there yet, but she wanted to understand the landscape. She wanted to know what the terrain looked like before she decided which direction she was walking. The lawyer was a woman named Patricia Dowd, who had been referred to Celeste by a friend of Elena's, and who had the kind of direct, unhurried manner that told you she had seen worse situations than yours and helped people navigate out of them. She did not react to the name Valenti. Celeste appreciated that. They talked for an hour. Celeste asked questions. Patricia answered them without embellishing. When Celeste left the office, she felt something she hadn't expected. Not relief exactly, clarity. Like she had walked into a room and finally turned on the light. She was standing on the sidewalk outside Patricia's office, buttoning her coat against the November cold when her phone rang. Not Damien's number, a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer, she answered, Mrs. Valenti. The voice was male, professional, without warmth. My name isn't important. I'm calling to let you know that certain people are watching your movements this week. Not your husband. People who would benefit from his being distracted right now. She went still. What does that mean? She said. It means you should be careful about where you go alone. And it means your husband should know about this call. A pause. I'm not your enemy, Mrs. Valenti. I'm someone who doesn't want things to become more complicated than they already are. The line went dead. She stood on the sidewalk. The city moved around her cabs, people, the ordinary machinery of a Tuesday afternoon. She stood very still inside all of it, feeling the particular cold of realizing that the world she had been trying to quietly step away from was not quite ready to let her go. She put the phone in her pocket. She did not call Damien. She walked to her car, got in, checked the mirrors. Then she drove back to Elena's, went upstairs, poured herself a glass of water, and sat at the table thinking for a long time. That call had told her several things. Someone was watching. Someone had her number who shouldn't. Someone wanted Damien to know and had chosen to go through her instead of calling him directly, which meant they wanted her to be the one who made that call, who placed herself back inside his orbit, who gave him information that made her dependent on his protection again. She was being used as a mechanism to pull Damien's attention back to where someone else wanted it. The anger that rose in her was clean and specific. She was not going to be a mechanism. She called Elena instead of Damien. She told her about the call, factually, without panic. Elena listened and swore once under her breath. "You need to tell him," Elena said. And even Elena saying it meant it was probably true. "I know," Celeste said. "That doesn't mean anything else. It doesn't mean you're going back. It doesn't mean you're forgiving anything. It just means, I know," Celeste said again. "I know what it means." She hung up with Elena. She sat with the phone in her hand. Then she called Damien. He answered on the first ring. "Someone called me," she said without preamble. "A man I don't know, from a number I don't recognize. He said, people are watching my movements, that it's not you, that you should know." Silence. Then the particular quality of Damien's silence, when he shifted into operational mode, not absence, but compression. Like all the ordinary parts of him, condensed and something harder underneath came to the surface. "Tell me exactly what he said," Damien said. She told him. Word for word, because she had the kind of memory that retained things accurately when they mattered, and this mattered. Another silence. Longer. "Where are you right now?" he said. "Elena's. Are you alone?" "Elena's here. Good." A pause. "Don't go out alone tonight. I'm going to make some calls." "Damien." She kept her voice level. "I'm telling you this because it's information you need, and because I'm not interested in being anyone's leverage. I'm not telling you this because I'm coming home, or because things are different." "I understand that," he said. She waited to hear if he would push it. He didn't. "Thank you," he said. Just that. Nothing added onto it. "I'll take care of it." She ended the call. Elena was in the doorway watching her. Celeste looked up. "Well," Elena said. "Don't," Celeste said. "I wasn't going to say anything. You were going to say that even when I'm trying to leave him, I still end up calling him." Elena pressed her lips together. "I was going to ask if you wanted tea." "Yes," Celeste said. "That would be good." She didn't sleep well that night. Not because she was afraid. She had made a quiet internal calculation that if Damien said he would handle it, he would handle it. Because whatever else he was or wasn't, he was competent, but because her mind kept circling back to the same point. The call had been designed to pull her back in. And even knowing that, even seeing the mechanism clearly, she had still made the call to Damien. Not because she was weak, not because she needed him, but because walking away from someone was not the same as pretending they didn't exist, and right now their lives were still threaded together in ways that wouldn't unravel overnight. That was the part she hadn't fully calculated. Leaving a man like Damien wasn't a door you could close in a single motion. It was a room with many smaller doors inside it, and each one had to be opened and walked through separately. She had thought, somewhere in the back of her mind, that the clarity she'd felt after walking out of the house that night would carry her straight through to the end of it. She hadn't counted on the complications. She hadn't counted on him not being the version of himself she had prepared to fight. She lay in the dark in Elena's spare room and thought about the woman on the couch, and about Damien's arms stretched out easy, and about the way he'd said her name in the kitchen, 4 days later, rough and unpolished. Stripped of the authority he usually wrapped around everything. She thought about what Elena had said, "You look more like yourself right now than you have in 3 years." She thought about the documents in the box from the back of the closet. She thought about Patricia Dowd's office and the clean-lit feeling she'd had walking out of it. Then she thought about 14 years, about what was real inside them, and what had been the slow erosion of things she hadn't paid enough attention to. She fell asleep eventually, somewhere past 2 in the morning. She dreamed about nothing she could remember. 3 days later, Damien showed up at Elena's building. He didn't come upstairs. He called from the street one call, no pressure, and said, "I'm outside. You don't have to come down. But I'd like to talk to you in person if you're willing." She looked at the call for a moment. She went down. He was standing outside on the sidewalk, not in a car, not with anyone else. Just standing there in his coat with his hands in his pockets. He looked like a man who had been making choices about what to leave behind and hadn't finished making them yet. She crossed her arms. "What?" "I found out who made the call," he said. It was Russo's people. They've been watching for an opening, and they saw this as one. I figured it was something like that. I handled it. Okay. He was quiet for a moment. He looked at her like he was trying to figure out how to say something without the usual tools. No authority, no leverage, no charm. Just whatever was left after all of that was removed. I know you haven't decided anything, he said. That's right. I'm not here to push you. He paused. I just needed you to see me saying that in person instead of over a phone. She looked at him. She thought about 11 seconds. About the woman's laugh and his arms stretched out, relaxed. About the kitchen and the chair he'd gripped like it was the only thing holding him up. About every gradual quiet year she'd spent receding into the background of her own marriage. You need to go, she said. I'm not ready for whatever this is. He nodded. Not hurt, not performatively accepting. Just nodded like he heard her. Okay, he said. He stood there for one more second. Then he turned and walked back to the car at the curb. She watched him get in. She stood on the sidewalk in the cold until the car pulled away. Then she went inside and took the stairs instead of the elevator, because she needed 4 flights of something physical to process the fact that what she felt watching his car disappear was not nothing. She had not expected it to be nothing. She was not naive about feelings. But she had hoped, a little, that it would be less. She reached Elena's floor. She stopped outside the door. She pressed her back against the hallway wall. She was not going to cry in a 4th-floor hallway. She was going to stand here for 30 seconds, and then she was going to go back inside and figure out one careful step at a time what the rest of her life was actually going to look like. 28, 29, 30. She opened the door and went in. The next morning, Celeste woke up at 6:15 without an alarm. She lay there for a moment, listening to the building, the pipes in the walls, someone moving around in the apartment above, the distant sound of a truck on the street below. Elena's spare room was small, and the mattress was too soft, and the pillow smelled like the particular fabric softener Elena had used since college. It was, she thought, one of the most ordinary mornings she'd had in years. No security detail moving through the house, no Damien's phone going off at 7 a. And with calls she wasn't supposed to hear, just a soft mattress and city noise, and the specific quiet of a life that wasn't hers yet, but could be. She got up. She made coffee in Elena's kitchen, because Elena didn't wake up before 8:30 on a good day. She stood at the counter and drank it and looked out the window at a street that was just beginning to fill up a woman walking a dog, 2 men in work gear heading somewhere. A delivery truck double-parked while the driver argued with someone on his phone about something that was clearly not going to get resolved this morning. She thought about Damien standing on the sidewalk the night before. She thought about the way he'd said okay. Not the okay of a man who had accepted something, but the okay of a man who was trying to learn a different language and had just managed his first word. She poured the rest of the coffee down the drain because she'd let it go cold while she was thinking, and she did not like cold coffee, and she was going to start making better decisions as about small things as practice for the larger ones. She showered. She got dressed. She sat down at the small desk in the spare room with her laptop and the legal pad and the documents from her box. And she started making a list. Not a list of feelings, not a list of grievances. A practical list. What she had, what she needed, what the next 6 months could realistically look like if she was building something rather than just escaping something. There was a difference between those two things, and she intended to hold on to it. She was on the 3rd page of the legal pad when her phone buzzed. Not Damien. A number she recognized after a second Marco Reyes, who ran the day-to-day logistics of Damien's operation, and who had always treated Celeste with a careful, formal respect that she had understood to mean he was afraid of getting anything wrong where she was concerned. She stared at the name. Marco had never called her directly. Not once in 14 years, she answered, Mrs. Valenti. His voice was tight. Controlled in the way that meant he was working to keep it that way. I apologize for calling you. I wouldn't if it wasn't important. What happened? Mr. Valenti was at a meeting last night. After he left you. A pause. There was an incident. He's not seriously hurt. But I think you should know. She was already standing up. Where is he? He's at the private facility on Wicker. The one Dr. Harlan uses. He said not to call you. But Marco stopped. Started again. He said not to call you, Mrs. Valenti. I'm calling you anyway, because I've worked for this man for 11 years, and I've never seen him like this, and I thought someone should know who actually—" He stopped again. "Who actually what?" she said. "Who actually cares?" Marco said, like he was slightly embarrassed to have said it out loud. She was already looking for her shoes. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, she said. The facility on Wicker was not a hospital. It was the kind of place that didn't appear in any directory, that had a front that looked like a private physical therapy clinic, that served people who needed medical care without police reports or insurance trails. Celeste had known about it for years without ever going there. She had thought, more than once, that she was glad she'd never had reason to. She told the man at the front desk who she was, and he made a call and someone came to take her back without asking her to sign anything or wait in any waiting room. She had always had that access, and she had always been faintly uncomfortable with it. The way being handed things you didn't earn makes a certain kind of person uncomfortable. Damien was in a room at the end of a hall. He was sitting up, which she registered as a relief she hadn't known she was holding. He had a bandage wrapped around his left forearm and something across the left side of his face that was going to be a significant bruise by tomorrow. There was a cut above his eyebrow, held together with butterfly strips. He looked up when she came in. His expression did something complicated that resolved into something that was not quite relief and not quite guilt, and landed somewhere between them that she didn't have a word for. "Marco called you," he said. "Yes, I told him not to." He mentioned that. She pulled the chair from the corner and sat down across from him. She looked at the bandage on his arm and the cut above his eye and his face in general, and she thought, not for the first time, about the specific cost of the life he'd chosen. What happened? Russo's people were at the meeting. It shouldn't have been possible. Somebody inside let them know where I'd be. Someone inside your organization. Yes. She absorbed that. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine." "You have a cut above your eye and your arm is wrapped." "I'm fine, Celeste." He said it without edge. Just flat certainty. Nothing that matters. She looked at him. "You have someone inside who told Russo where you'd be," she said. "The same people who called me to pull your attention back toward home." "That's not random, Damien. Someone is doing this deliberately, and they're using me as part of it." Something shifted in his eyes. "I know. Do you know who?" A pause. "I have a strong idea. Then why are you sitting in this room instead of doing something about it?" "Because I needed 20 minutes to not be in motion," he said. And then, after a beat, "and because I didn't know if you'd come." She looked at him. He wasn't asking for anything with that. He was just saying it, just the fact of it, sitting there between them. She uncrossed her arms. She set her hands in her lap. "I'm here," she said. "I see that. It doesn't change anything." "I know. I came because Marco called me and you were hurt, and I'm not—" She stopped. "I'm not built to not respond to that, regardless of everything else." "I know," Damien said again, quietly. She stood up. She walked to the window. It looked out at a narrow alley and a brick wall. Not much of a view. She looked at it anyway. "Who is it?" she said. Inside, a silence behind her. "Vincent," he said. She turned around. Vincent Caruso had been with Damien for 9 years. He ran the Northside Collections, sat at the table for every significant decision, ate dinner at their house twice a year. Celeste had made that dinner. She had sat at the table across from the man. "Are you certain?" she said. "Certain enough. And what are you going to do?" Damien's jaw moved. Something went through his face, not anger exactly. Something older than anger. Something that had been alive in him long before she knew him, and that she had always understood was there without ever seeing it this directly. "What I always do," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. "I'm going to go back to Elena's," she said. He nodded. She picked up her coat from the back of the chair. She moved toward the door. Then she stopped. "Be careful," she said, without turning around. "Yeah," he said. She walked out. She didn't tell Elena where she'd been. She said she'd gone for a walk, and Elena looked at her with the specific expression Elena had been perfecting since they were children, the ones that said, "I don't believe you, and we both know it, and I'm choosing not to press it." She made them both eggs, and they ate at the small table and talked about other things. Elena's work, a film Elena had seen, the building's heating system that was already failing in November, and Celeste was grateful for all of it, because it gave her somewhere to put her face that didn't require honesty. After breakfast, she went back to the spare room and sat on the bed and stared at the legal pad. She had gone to him. That was the fact she was sitting with. She had gone because Marco had called, and she was not built to stay away from someone, she from someone who was hurt. That was what she'd told Damien. Not quite a complete sentence. Not quite the truth. She picked up the pen. She wrote at the top of a fresh page what I actually feel. She stared at that for a while. Then she crossed it out. She was not going to do this with a legal pad. She was going to do this by being honest with herself in the direct, unsentimental way. She'd been honest with everything else in her life before she'd slowly stopped applying that standard to Damien. She felt, still, the pull of him. She was not going to pretend that standing across from him in that room, with a cut above his eye, had been neutral. It had not been neutral. 14 years of choosing someone doesn't dissolve in 3 weeks, and she had never expected it to. What she had expected was that her own clarity would be stronger than the pull. And it was she had walked out. She had come back to Elena's. She had not said anything she didn't mean. But the gap between those two things was smaller than she'd wanted it to be. That scared her. Not because she was afraid of loving Damien. She had spent 14 years not being afraid of that. What scared her was the possibility that she might love him in a way that cost her the version of herself she was just beginning to find her way back to. That was the real question, not whether she loved him. She knew the answer to that. The question was whether she could hold on to herself and him at the same time. Whether those two things were even compatible in the shape their marriage had taken. Whether the shape could change, or whether it was structural, built into the foundation, in ways that meant any real change would require tearing the whole thing down first. She put the pen down. She picked up her phone and called Patricia Dowd. Patricia's office was on a high floor downtown, with windows that looked out over the lake. It was the kind of office that made you feel like the world could be managed from up here, which Celeste understood was probably intentional. "I'm not filing anything," Celeste said when she'd sat down. "I'm still not there. I just want to think out loud with someone who doesn't have a stake in it." "That's what I'm here for," Patricia said. "He was hurt last night. Something in his business. I went to see him." Patricia didn't react to that. Just waited. "I don't think going was the wrong thing to do. But I think it complicates what I've been trying to build some distance to figure out." "How so?" "Because I went without thinking about it. Marco called and I was already looking for my shoes." She paused. I've spent 3 weeks trying to establish that my first instinct doesn't have to be toward him. And then the first real test of that, I walked right through it like it wasn't there." "Do you think your instinct was wrong?" "I think it was automatic. And I've been making a lot of automatic choices for 14 years that I'm only just now looking at clearly." Patricia was quiet for a moment. "There's a difference between an automatic choice and a wrong choice," she said. "Going to see a person who's hurt, someone you have real history with, that's not necessarily a symptom of something you need to correct. The question is what you did with it once you were there." "I stayed for about 15 minutes. I asked what happened. I told him to be careful, then I left." "Did he ask you to stay?" "No." "Did he pressure you in any direction?" "No." Celeste thought about it. He said he didn't know if I'd come. Not like he was trying to make me feel something. Just like it was the truth." Patricia looked at her steadily. "Mrs. Valenti, what's the specific fear you're sitting with right now?" Celeste was quiet for a moment. "Then that I'm going to spend the next 6 months doing exactly what I've always done, which is orbiting him and telling myself I'm maintaining distance, and then one day I'll look up and nothing will have changed." She paused. "I've done that before. I've had conversations with myself about what I needed, and then done the familiar thing anyway, because it was easier, or because he said something true in a voice I believed. I've done that cycle at least 3 times in 14 years, and each time I convinced myself it was different. What makes you think this time is the same?" "Nothing yet. But I went to see him last night without putting 30 seconds of thought into it." Patricia set down her pen. "Here's what I'm hearing," she said. "You're afraid of your own patterns, which means you're self-aware in a way that could actually protect you if you use it well. The problem is when self-awareness becomes a way of punishing yourself for every instinct rather than distinguishing between instincts that serve you and ones that don't." Celeste looked at her. "Did going last night set you back from anything concrete?" Patricia asked. "No." "Are you still here? Still building the picture of what you want?" "Yes." "Then hold that," Patricia said. "You don't have to erase the 14 years to make good decisions going forward. You're not starting from zero. You're just starting from honesty, which is actually harder." She went back to Elena's and found her sister on the couch with her shoes off, and a phone call in progress that she waved Celeste through. Celeste went to the kitchen and made tea, and stood at the counter waiting for it, and let the afternoon light do what afternoon light does, in November, thin and sideways and honest about the shortness of things. Her phone went off. Not Damien, not Marco, a name she had not seen in a long time. Sylvia Grant, who had been her closest friend before the marriage, when Celeste had a life that operated on a different kind of frequency. They had drifted because these things drift: distance, schedules, the gradual way Damien's world had required Celeste to be careful about who she spent time with and what she said. Sylvia had eventually stopped calling, because Celeste kept giving her versions of her life that didn't quite match up, and Sylvia was perceptive enough to know when she was being managed and too proud to keep accepting it. She stared at the name. She answered, Celeste. Sylvia's voice was the same. Direct, a little dry, the warmth underneath it that you had to know her to hear. I heard you left him. Celeste closed her eyes briefly. News travels. Elena called my cousin Jess, who told my aunt, who told me. It went around in about 48 hours. That's efficient. Are you okay? Celeste leaned against the counter. I'm figuring things out. That's not an answer. It's the most honest one I have right now. Sylvia was quiet for a second. I'm not calling to get into your business. I'm calling because I spent 3 years watching you disappear, and I want you to know that if you need anything, a place to be, a person to talk to, whatever, I'm here. No conditions. No, I told you so. Celeste looked at the ceiling. The tea kettle began its low whistle. Sylvia, she said. Yeah, I missed you. A pause. I missed you too. Quite a lot, actually. I'm sorry I was... She stopped. Started over. I managed you. When we were still talking. I gave you edited versions because I thought that was protecting both of us. It was also protecting him. I know that now. I know you know, Sylvia said. Not unkindly. I also know you know I'm not going to hold it against you. You should a little. Maybe. But I've spent 3 years doing that and it's boring. I'd rather just have my friend back. Another pause. If that's something that can happen. The kettle was fully whistling now. Celeste took it off the heat. Yes, she said. That's something that can happen. 2 days later, Damien's number came up at 8 in the morning, and she answered on the 3rd ring. I need to see you, he said. She heard something in his voice that she hadn't heard before. Not the controlled softness of the kitchen, not the compressed operational focus from the clinic. Something rawer, like a hinge that had finally been pushed past its tolerance. What happened, she said. Vincent confirmed. And there's more. A pause. There's a lot more, Celeste. Some of it I need you to hear it from me, before you hear it from anyone else. She felt something tighten in her chest. Hear what? She said. Not on the phone, Damien. Please. The word came out rough, like he had to force it through something. She stood in the middle of Elena's spare room, with her hand around the phone, and thought for exactly 5 seconds. Elena's has a coffee place on the corner, she said. 14th Street. 1 hour. I'll be there. He was already there when she arrived, which meant he'd been in the car before she'd agreed to meet, which meant he'd been that certain she'd say yes, or that desperate to see her, regardless of the answer. She wasn't sure which of those bothered her more. He looked worse than he had at the clinic. The bruise on his face had developed into the full thing, dark and spread and ugly, in a way that made him look like a man who'd had something real done to him. He had coffee in front of him that he wasn't drinking. She sat down across from him without taking her coat off. The place was half full with the mid-morning crowd. No one looked at them. She had chosen it for that reason. Talk, she said. He wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. He stared at the table for a second. Then he looked up at her, and she saw it not the armor, not the authority, just whatever was underneath all of that, exposed and unmanaged. Vincent wasn't working alone, he said. He was working with Tommy Cass. From the Southside operation. She knew the name. Tommy Cass ran territory that should have been allied. That's a problem. It's a bigger problem than that. Because Tommy has been talking to someone about me. About us. About you specifically. He paused. He's been feeding information about your routine. Where you go. When you're alone. To Russo. The temperature of the room didn't change, but something in her body registered a shift. Since when, she said. Since before you left the house. He met her eyes. Tommy knew you'd left before I told anyone. Which means he was watching the house. Which means he stopped. His jaw was tight. Someone has been using you as a way to get to me for longer than the last 3 weeks. It started before any of this. She sat with that. She thought about the woman on the couch. She thought about whether that had been random, whether it had been managed, whether the ease of it, Damien not bothering to hide it, the woman comfortable with her shoes off, had been designed for her to find. Did they set it up, she said. Her voice came out very flat. The woman. Was that? I don't know. He said it immediately, which meant he'd already thought about it. I don't know if it was engineered or if they just used it once it happened. I honestly don't know, and I'm not going to tell you I do. She looked at him. It matters, she said. I know it does. Because if someone manipulated that situation to blow up our marriage and use me as a pressure point against you, she stopped. Her hands were flat on the table. If that's true, then what I walked into that night was a scene. And I've been making decisions based on a scene. Your decisions are still valid, he said. Whatever happened, you saw what you saw and that doesn't. Don't. She cut him off. Don't tell me what my decisions are right now. I'm trying to think. He went quiet. She stared at the surface of the table. She thought very carefully. I need to know, she said. Everything you know about how long this has been happening and who's involved. Not because it changes what happened between us, but because I've been walking around this city thinking I was making clean choices about my own life, and apparently I've been a variable in someone else's calculation this whole time. She looked up. That ends now. I need the full picture. Some of the full picture is not good for you to know. Damien. Her voice was exactly level. I have kept your secrets for 14 years. I have never once used anything against you. I have sat across from people who were afraid of you and never let them see that I was sometimes afraid of you too. Do not manage me right now. Something broke open in his face. Not dramatically. Just a small visible crack in the surface of the man who had spent 20 years treating information as the primary currency of survival. Vincent has a record of calls, he said. I have it. Some of those calls involved your name, your location, your schedule. At times, I didn't know you'd told anyone. Which means somewhere in your circle, someone has also been talking. She felt the cold of it move through her. Who? She said. He was quiet, Damien. Who? I don't want to say it. Until I'm certain. Then get certain, she said fast. She stood up. She picked up her coat. Where are you going? He said. Back to Elena's. She stopped. She looked at him. Lock it down. Whatever you need to do to get the answers, do it. And when you have them... She paused, and the pause was full of something she hadn't decided how to name yet. You call me. He looked up at her. Okay. She walked out of the coffee shop into the November cold and stood on the sidewalk and breathed. Someone in her circle. Someone who knew her routine. She ran through the list in her head with a speed and clarity that surprised her names, interactions, the specific pieces of her life since she'd left the house 3 weeks ago that she'd shared with anyone. Elena Sylvia, who had called 2 days ago, Patricia Dowd. Marco, she went still. She pulled out her phone. She called Elena. It rang 4 times. Elena always answered in 2. 4 rings before, hey, what's up? Who did you call? Celeste said. What? After I left Damien. In the first few days. Who did you call to tell them what was happening? A silence. Elena. I called Jess, Elena said. Just Jess. I wasn't. I thought she should know you might need some support. And Jess knows people. Does Jess know anyone connected to the South Side? Another silence, longer, and in the length of it, Celeste had her answer before her sister said anything at all. And the cold she felt was not the November air, but something entirely different, the specific temperature of realizing that the walls of the room she'd been trying to escape had always been thinner than she'd thought, and that the people she trusted most could still, without meaning to, leave the door open for the wrong things to walk through. The silence on the phone lasted long enough that Celeste counted it. 7 seconds. Then Elena said, Jess doesn't know anyone like that. Does she know anyone connected to the South Side? Celeste said again. Same word, same tone. Not louder, not softer. I don't, Celeste. Jess is just Jess. She works in real estate. She knows half of Chicago. That doesn't mean. Elena. Celeste pressed her back against the brick wall of the building behind her, out of the foot traffic. I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm asking you a direct question because I need to understand how information about my location got to people I have never met and never spoken to. She heard her sister breathing. Her ex, Elena said finally. The words came out smaller than usual. Her ex-boyfriend. I think he works for someone on the south side. She doesn't see him anymore. They broke up about 8 months ago, but I don't know if I don't know what they are. Celeste closed her eyes. She kept them closed for 3 seconds. Okay, she said. Celeste, I'm not angry with you. You sound angry. I'm not. I'm thinking. She opened her eyes. The street in front of her was just a street. People with places to be, problems she couldn't see, lives organized around entirely different things. What did you tell Jess? Exactly. That you'd left. That you were staying with me. I told her you were doing okay, but it was hard, and you might need people around. Elena's voice had gotten tight. I didn't give her your schedule. I didn't tell her where you went. I just told her you were here. That was enough, Celeste said. I'm sorry, I know you are. She meant it. That was the thing about Elena, she had never once done anything to hurt Celeste on purpose, and it hadn't protected either of them. I have to make a call. I'll be back soon. She hung up. She called Damien. He picked up before the first ring finished. What, Elena's friend Jess? Her ex worked south side. That's your thread. A pause short, the sound of him filing it. You got that fast, I asked directly. That's generally how it works. She paused. Fix it. And Damien, she stopped herself. What? Whatever you find, I want to know. All of it. Don't edit it for me. Some of it, she said. That's not negotiable. She ended the call before he could answer and stood on the sidewalk in front of a coffee shop she'd just walked out of, in a city that had apparently been watching her for longer than she'd known. And she thought, the room I thought I was escaping was never as clean as I believed. She went back to Elena's and she did not have the conversation Elena was bracing for. Elena was standing in the kitchen with her arms crossed and her chin slightly up the posture she'd had since childhood when she was preparing to absorb blame. Celeste walked past her, filled a glass with water, drank half of it, set it on the counter. I need you to call Jess, Celeste said. Not to question her, just to talk to her normally. And while you're talking, I need you to find out casually, without making it a thing, whether she's had any contact with her ex in the last month. Elena uncrossed her arms. You want me to fish? I want you to talk to your friend the way you always do and pay attention. That's fishing. Yes, Celeste said. It is. Elena looked at her for a long moment. Something shifted in her face, the defensiveness leaving, something more careful taking its place. You think she knew, Elena said, Jess. I don't think Jess is involved in anything deliberately. I think she talked to someone who was, and that person listened carefully. Celeste set the glass down. I also think it's possible her ex asked her things she didn't realize were being asked. That's how this works. People don't usually know they're the leak. How do you know how this works? Celeste looked at her sister. 14 years, Elena. I learned things whether I wanted to or not. Elena picked up her phone without another word and went to the other room. Celeste sat down at the small table. She spread her hands flat on the surface and looked at them, and thought about what Damien had said some of those calls involved. Your name, your location, your schedule. At times I didn't know you'd told anyone. Times he didn't know she'd told anyone, which meant her schedule had been tracked through channels that weren't connected to Elena. Which meant Jess's ex was a thread, possibly an important one, but not necessarily the only thread. She thought about Patricia Dowd's office. The building, the front desk, the parking structure underneath. She thought about Sylvia calling 2 days ago, out of nowhere, after years of silence. She hated that she was thinking about Sylvia. She made herself think it anyway. Damien called her at 2 in the afternoon. I have something, he said. It's not what I expected. Tell me, not on the phone. I'm sending Marco to bring you here. To the house. Before you say no, he continued before she could speak. This isn't about us. This is operational, and you are a part of this, whether you want to be or not at this point. And I think you have the right here in person, where I can see your face. She thought about it for 4 seconds. Fine, but Marco brings me and Marco brings me back. I'm not staying. Understood. Marco arrived in 22 minutes in a car she didn't recognize, which was intentional. He was polite and quiet the whole drive, the way he'd been the night he called her to the clinic, like a man who was managing a situation he hadn't created and was trying very hard not to make worse. The house looked the same from the outside. Of course it did. Houses didn't rearrange themselves for dramatic effect. The November light hit the stone facade the same way it always had, and the side drive still had the crack in it she'd been meaning to have fixed for 2 years, and the side door still opened, with the same particular resistance it always had. She hadn't been inside since the morning she'd come back for her things. It smelled the same. That was the first thing. She hadn't expected that to register so immediately, the specific smell of a place you've lived for years, which is not exactly anything you can name, but is entirely distinct from every other place in the world. She stood in the hallway for 1 second and let it land, and then she put it away. Damien was in the study, not the kitchen. That was a choice. The kitchen was where they'd had their first real conversation. After she left, it was domestic, neutral. The study was where he worked. He was showing her something different. He was at the desk. There were documents on it. Physical papers, printed, spread across the surface in a pattern that wasn't casual. He'd been reviewing them. He stood up when she came in, but didn't come around the desk. Marco closed the door behind her and stayed outside it. She looked at Damien. She looked at the papers. "Show me," she said. He turned one of the documents to face her. She crossed to the desk and looked at it. It was a phone record. Columns of numbers, dates, times. He had highlighted 3 rows in yellow. She looked at the highlighted numbers. She looked at the dates. She looked at the name at the top of the record. The name at the top was not Jess. It was not Jess's ex. It was not Vincent or Tommy Cass or anyone from the South Side. The name at the top of the record was Elena. Celeste went completely still. The room didn't change. Damien didn't move. The papers were just papers, just ink on white, just columns of data, and she looked at them and understood. In the particular way you understand something when your mind is very clear and very unwilling at the same time, that 3 of the highlighted calls had been made from Elena's number to a number that Marco had identified, in a note clipped to the corner of the document as a burner registered to a holding company that connected through 2 layers of corporate distance to Richard Russo. She read it twice. Then she put the document back on the desk. Very carefully. "Flat when," she said. "The first call was 8 days before the night you came home early." Damien's voice was low. Controlled in the way that meant he was managing something very large underneath it. The last call was 4 days ago, 8 days before the night she'd come home early. She ran the math without wanting to. 8 days before that night, she had told Elena she was going to her sister's for dinner. She had told her the time. She had told her Damien wouldn't be home. She had told Elena, "There are 6 calls total," Damien said. The duration suggests she wasn't just passing information. She was being debriefed, for lack of a better word. Celeste picked up the document again. She needed to see it again. She needed her eyes on it again, because some part of her was still trying to produce an alternative explanation, and she wanted to exhaust that part completely before she accepted what she was looking at. 6 calls, dates, times, duration in minutes, Elena's number. Russo's burner? Did she initiate? Celeste said. 4 of the 6. She called them. She set the paper down again. She felt something move through her that wasn't grief yet and wasn't rage yet, something prior to both of them. A kind of foundational shift. Like the moment, just before you understand that the ground under a particular part of your life was never solid. "Get Marco," she said. "Celeste, get Marco. I want to go back." "You should, Damien?" She looked at him. Whatever he saw in her face, it was enough. He didn't finish the sentence. He opened the study door and said something to Marco in a low voice, and Marco appeared in the frame. Celeste walked out without looking at the documents again, without looking at the desk, without looking at the room that still smelled like a house she had lived in for 14 years. In the car, she sat in the back seat with her hands in her lap and looked at nothing. Marco didn't try to talk. 12 blocks from Elena's building, she said. "Stop the car." Marco pulled over. She got out. She needed to walk the rest of the way. She needed the cold and the friction of pavement and the sound of the city around her, rather than the interior of a car where she had nowhere to put any of what she was carrying. She walked. She thought about Elena's voice on the phone that morning. That 4-second delay before she said Jess. How careful it had been. How Celeste had read it as guilt about sharing information she shouldn't have, because that was the version that made sense when you assumed the person you were reading was basically who they presented themselves to be. She thought about Elena saying, "You look more like yourself right now than you have in 3 years." She thought about how much she had told Elena. Not just location and schedule, but everything. Her conversations with Damien, her meeting with Patricia Dowd. the state of her finances, her thinking, her uncertainty. Everything she'd been processing out loud in that small apartment, at that small table, in the spare room she'd thought of as a refuge. All of it overheard. All of it passed on. She stopped walking. She was on a corner 2 blocks from Elena's building. She stood there in the November cold with people moving around her, and she identified, with great precision, the emotion that had finally arrived. It was not the devastating surprise kind of grief. It was the worst kind, the kind that has a specific quality of recognition inside it, like looking at something you realize, only now you had been not looking at for a very long time. Small things rearranged themselves. Elena encouraging her to confide more, ask more, talk through every detail of what she was thinking. Elena's insistence that she stay, that she not make any decisions too fast, that she keep Damien close enough to observe. Elena calling Jess specifically, right away, not to get Celeste's support, but Celeste understood to establish a communication channel while she figured out how to establish the other one. She thought about the money. She thought about what she knew of Russo's organization, and what Russo would pay for real-time intelligence on Damien Valenti's most exposed point, which was his wife, who was walking away from him, who knew things, who could be used. Elena had a lease she couldn't afford on her own. Celeste had always known that without asking too many questions about how she managed it. She had assumed the way families assume that things work out, that people figure it out, that you don't excavate the details of someone's finances when they haven't asked for help. She started walking again, not toward Elena's building. She went into a coffee place on the corner, not the same one from this morning, a different one, smaller and noisier, and she got in line and ordered something and paid for it and took it to a table in the back corner and sat down. She called Damien. He answered immediately. The lease, she said. Elena's apartment. Pull her financials if you can. I want to know when the payments changed. A beat. You think it's been longer than 8 days. I think I don't know what I think yet, and I'd rather know than assume. Give me 2 hours. She sat with the coffee she wasn't drinking, and she thought about what it meant to have been wrong about something this completely. Not wrong about a fact or a detail, wrong about a person. The kind of wrong that doesn't announce itself, that hides inside love and shared history, and the specific trust you give someone because they are your blood and you have known them your entire life. She thought about how many of her decisions over the last 3 weeks had been made inside Elena's apartment, at Elena's table, with Elena in the next room. How many of those decisions had Russo known about before she'd finished making them? She thought about the phone call she'd received on the sidewalk outside Patricia's office. The man's voice. Mrs. Valenti, certain people are watching your movements. That call had been designed to push her toward Damien. She had identified that at the time. What she hadn't identified was the second layer, that the call might also have been designed to test Elena's channel, to see how Celeste responded, to calibrate how much influence the operation had over her movements. She had called Elena first that night, before she'd called Damien. Elena had known everything. She sat in the coffee shop for 40 minutes without touching her drink. Then she got up and walked to a hotel 3 blocks away, not Elena's building, not the one she'd stayed in before, and she paid for a room in cash and went upstairs and sat on the edge of the bed and called Patricia Dowd. I need to meet with you tomorrow, she said, and I need you to tell me honestly whether anything we've discussed in your office could have been overheard, recorded, or accessed by anyone. Patricia's pause was professional and brief. My office is swept twice a month. The last sweep was 6 days ago, and it was clean. Is there something specific you're concerned about? I'm concerned about everything right now, Celeste said. I'll explain tomorrow. She hung up. She lay back on the hotel bed, with her coat still on, and stared at the ceiling and thought about the thing she still had to do, which was confront Elena, and about how she was going to do it in a way that produced truth rather than performance. Elena was good at performance. She had always known that about her sister. Elena was emotional and expressive and reactive, and those qualities were real, and they were also, Celeste was now understanding, effective cover for the movement of things underneath. She was not going to go at Elena with accusation. Accusation gave Elena a frame to respond to. She was going to do what she'd been doing all her life. When she needed to understand something, she was going to ask specific questions and listen to the space between the words. But she wasn't going to do it tonight. Tonight she needed to sleep in a room that wasn't being monitored. and she needed to stop feeling the ground shifting under her long enough to think straight. Her phone buzzed. "Damien," she answered. "Elena's rent changed 14 months ago," he said. "Went up by $300 a month because the building raised it. She was 2 months behind, and then she caught up suddenly single deposit mid-month, not from any account I can trace to ordinary income. 14 months, not 3 weeks, not 8 days, 14 months. "Damien," she said, and her voice came out flat and strange, like something reading a set of numbers. "Yeah," he said, like he already knew what she was about to say. "This started before I knew anything was wrong." Yes. She wasn't reacting to what happened. This was already in place. Yes. She sat with that. The woman she had called the morning after the worst night of her life. The person she had gone to without thinking, whose spare room she'd moved into without question, who had held the space of safest place, while Celeste figured out how to rebuild herself. Positioned there. Ready. For 14 months. "I need to know," Celeste said, and she had to stop for a second and breathe. "I need to know if the night I came home early, if that was—" She stopped again. Damien was very quiet. "I don't know," he said. And then more quietly, "I don't know, Celeste. I've been asking myself the same thing for the last 2 hours." She pressed her free hand flat on the bed, hard kneading the pressure of something solid. "If that night was arranged," she said carefully, "if someone made sure I'd come home when I did and find what I found." She stopped. Breathed. Then the woman on the couch. The ease of it. "The way you weren't hiding." "I wasn't hiding because I didn't think you'd be home," Damien said. His voice had something in it she couldn't quite name. "And because I made a terrible choice, and I wasn't thinking about consequences. I wasn't thinking about you." A pause. "But that doesn't mean I planned for you to see it. And it doesn't mean I was set up. I'm not asking you to absolve me of it. But someone could have known about her," Celeste said. "Someone could have known your schedule, known mine, known when, to make sure I came home early." "Yes. Did Elena know my plans for that night?" The silence was the answer before Damien produced words. "You texted me at 5 saying you'd be at your sister's until at least 10, he said. "And then you came home at 9. She had texted him. And Elena would have seen her leave and known she was going to Damien's number, would have seen her pick up her phone to text him, before she walked out the door. Elena had known she was supposed to be out until 10. She had come home at 9 because the dinner had ended early, because she and Elena had wrapped up conversation earlier than expected, because Elena had suggested they call it a night, said she had an early morning, sent Celeste back into the world an hour ahead of schedule. She sat on the hotel bed. She thought about 11 seconds. She thought about the woman's laugh, light and unguarded, completely comfortable, shoes off, like she'd been there before. She thought about Damien's arm stretched along the back of the couch. Not on the woman just there, relaxed. The way a man sits when he isn't performing anything for anyone. She thought about whether any of that had been constructed, calibrated, placed for her to find, or whether she had simply found a real thing that was happening in ordinary betrayal, unwatched, unscripted, and then been handed to people who knew how to use it. The answer was that she did not know, and not knowing, she realized now, was the most dangerous position she had ever been in. Because every decision she had made in the last 3 weeks had been built on a foundation whose materials she had not verified. She had been choosing clearly inside a frame she had not built, a frame Elena had possibly helped construct 14 months before anything had happened that Celeste knew to question. She got off the bed. She went to the window. The city outside was doing what it always did, indifferent, relentless, full of its own machinery. She called Damien back. "I need you to do something for me," she said. "And I need it done before I talk to Elena." "What?" "I need to know if Elena was the one who suggested the dinner that night. That specific night. 14 months ago I wouldn't have noticed. But there might be a text record, something." A pause. "I can try. And I need to know about the woman," Celeste said. Her voice was steady. She made it steady. "Who she is. How long. Whether anyone who wasn't you knew about her." A longer pause. "Her name is Dana," Damien said quietly. "It had been going on for about 6 weeks. It wasn't anything I'd told anyone. But someone could have found out." "Yes. And if someone in Russo's network was watching you closely enough, they would have known about her." "Yes." She nodded to herself, to the window. "Then someone knew what to set up, knew when to send me home, and trusted that what I found would be real enough that I wouldn't look for the frame around it. Damien said nothing for a moment. Then Celeste, what you found was real. What I did was real. Whatever else is true about that night, I need you to know I understand that. I know you do, she said. But right now I need you to understand that I'm not coming back to you or to this marriage or to any version of us until I know exactly what Elena did, when she did it, who she did it for, and whether the night that broke everything between us was the last piece of a plan someone spent over a year building. She paused. And when I know all of that, then we can talk about what's real and what it means. She heard him breathe. Okay, he said. I need one more thing, she said. What? I need you to find out where Elena is right now. Don't approach her. Don't send anyone near her. Just know where she is. Because tomorrow morning I'm going to walk in there and sit across from my sister and ask her to tell me the truth, and I need to know she hasn't already run. The line was quiet for 3 full seconds. Then Damien Valenti, who had spent 20 years knowing how to close exits, said, She's at her apartment. She hasn't left since you did. She's been calling your number every 40 minutes. Celeste stood at the hotel window with the phone in her hand, and the city spread out beyond the glass and the specific weight of understanding that the person she had trusted most in the wreckage of the last 3 weeks had been the one holding the door open for the people who wanted to use that wreckage against everyone in it, and that tomorrow she was going to have to sit across from that person and look her in the face. She didn't sleep. She lay on the hotel bed with her coat finally off, and her shoes on the floor and the ceiling above her doing nothing useful. And she ran through everything she knew, the way you run through a room you've memorized, not looking for new furniture. Just confirming what's there, what's where, what you'll need to navigate in the dark. Elena had been making calls to a Russo-connected burner for 14 months. The deposit that caught up her rent had come from an untraceable source. She had sent Celeste home an hour early on the night that broke everything, and she had known Celeste was supposed to be out until 10. She had been the first call Celeste made, after walking out of her own house, the first place she'd gone, the container for every fear and plan and uncertainty Celeste had produced in the weeks since. That was the architecture. That was what Celeste had to hold in her head walking into tomorrow. She got up at 5:30 because lying down wasn't doing anything except giving her body a horizontal surface to be tense on. She showered. She put on the same clothes because she hadn't planned to be in a hotel, and she was not going back to Elena's to change. She ordered coffee from room service and drank it at the window, watching the city go from black to gray to the particular flat white of a November dawn that promises nothing. At 7 she called Damien. Elena's still there, she said. Car's been outside since midnight. She's there. Did you find anything on the dinner that night? The texts? Working on it. Give me until 8. She hung up. She drank the rest of the coffee. She thought about the specific way Esena had said you look more like yourself right now than you have in 3 years, and about how she had felt that land, had let it mean something, had carried it as evidence that someone saw her clearly. At 8:03 Damien called back. There are texts, he said. From Elena to you, 3 days before the night. She suggested the dinner. She said she hadn't seen you in a while, and she wanted to catch up. You agreed. A pause. There are also texts between Elena's number and an unregistered cell on the same day she texted you. We can't read those messages. The app she used encrypts them, but the timing is there. Celeste set the coffee cup down. 3 days before. Elena had proposed the dinner 3 days before and had communicated with Russo's channel the same day. Okay, she said, Celeste. His voice was different. Not operational. Not the compressed functionality she'd heard from him through most of this. You don't have to do this today. You could let me... No, she said it immediately. I talked to her. Not you, not Marco, not anyone else. Me, she's my problem too. She's my sister. The words came out stripped of everything except the fact of them. She's my sister and I talked to her. A silence. Okay, he said. I'll call you after. She put on her coat. She picked up her bag. She took the elevator down and walked out into the cold morning and flagged a cab because she was not getting in a car that Damien had sent and she was not walking into this with any of his infrastructure around her. She needed to do this exactly as herself. Elena answered the door in 30 seconds, which meant she'd been awake and close to it. She was in yesterday's clothes, with her hair pulled back and her face doing the complicated thing it did when she was trying to manage several emotional registers At once relief, guilt, worry, love, all of it moving across her features like weather. "I've been calling you," Elena said. "I know I needed to be somewhere alone last night." Celeste stepped inside. She didn't take her coat off. She moved to the small table and sat down and put her hands flat on the surface and looked at her sister. Elena closed the door. She stayed near it for a second, reading the room. Elena was good at reading rooms. Celeste was revising her understanding of how good. "Sit down," Celeste said. Elena sat across the table. She wrapped her hands around each other in her lap. "I'm going to ask you some things," Celeste said, "and I need you to tell me the truth. Not the version of the truth that protects you. Not the version that makes it more complicated than it is. Just the actual truth." Elena's jaw tightened. "What's going on?" "How long have you been in contact with Richard Russo's organization?" The silence that followed was not the silence of a person who didn't understand the question. It was the silence of a person who had been waiting for this specific question and had still not finished deciding what to do with it. Elena's face went through 3 things in 4 seconds. Celeste watched all of them. "Celeste, how long?" Elena closed her eyes. She kept them closed. Her hands in her lap pressed together hard enough that the knuckles went pale. "About a year," she said, "a little over." The room was quiet. Outside, a car went past. Someone in the apartment above them walked heavily across the floor. The building's heater kicked on with its familiar low sound. Celeste breathed, one breath measured in and out. "Tell me how it started," she said. Elena opened her eyes. They were dry, which told Celeste something. This wasn't going to be a confession wrapped in tears. Not yet. Elena was still in the part of it where she was trying to control the shape of what came out. "I was behind on the rent," Elena said. "You know I was behind." I wouldn't ask you. I wasn't going to ask you, because you already had enough." She paused. "Someone approached me. A man I didn't know. He said he knew about my financial situation, and he could help. He said it would just be information. Small things. He said it wouldn't hurt anyone." "It wouldn't hurt anyone," Celeste said. Elena flinched slightly. "I know. What did he ask for?" "At first, it was just general. What Damien's schedule looked like from your end. Whether you ever mentioned specific meetings or locations. Things that seemed in isolation like nothing." She paused. Then it was more specific. "Your schedule. Where you went. He said they wanted to understand your movements, not to hurt you, too." "Stop," Celeste held up one hand. "Don't give me what they told you it was for. Give me what you actually provided." Elena's throat moved. "Your routines, when you went to certain places. Who you saw." "The dinner," she stopped. "The dinner," Celeste said. "I was asked to get you out of the house on a specific night. They said they told me it was about planting something. A document. Something in the house they needed you not to be there for." Celeste looked at her. "And you believed that?" "I wanted to believe it." Elena's voice had dropped. "I knew by then that it probably wasn't the whole truth. But I also knew that if I stopped, they'd use what they had. I'd been doing it for 6 months by then, and I was in, and they made it clear there wasn't an exit." "Did you know about the woman, Dana?" Elena went still. Celeste watched her face with the attention she had not given it closely enough before. "Elena," she said. "I knew Damien was seeing someone," Elena said finally. "I didn't tell them about it. They already knew." A pause, and then more quietly, "They told me to get you out of the house on that night, specifically." I asked why. "They said it would be better for you to know the truth about what Damien was doing." Her voice was barely above a flat tone now. "They said they were protecting you." Celeste put both palms flat on the table. "They sent me home to find him," she said. "You sent me home. I ended the dinner early. You sent me home," not louder. Just clearer. Elena said nothing. "You knew what I was going to find," Celeste said. "And you sent me there. And then you were the first call I made. You were the first place I went." She paused. "And everything I told you for the next 3 weeks went straight to the people who arranged the whole thing." Elena's hands came up to her face. She pressed them there for a second. When she brought them down, her eyes were wet. "I tried to protect you," she said, and the terrible thing about it was that she meant it. Celeste could hear that she meant it. Underneath everything else. "I thought if you left him, if you got out, then none of it would matter. I told myself that what you found was true, and it was, and you needed to know it." "Stop." Celeste's voice came out sharp enough that Elena stopped immediately. "Don't make this about helping me. That's not what this was." It was both things. It can be both things, it can't. Celeste stood up. She needed to be standing. Because the moment it became both things is the moment you should have told me. You should have told me everything. You should have said, Elena, I made a terrible mistake. I'm in something I can't get out of. And here's what they've done with your life. And here's what they're planning. That was the choice that would have been both things. She looked at her sister. You didn't make that choice. You kept feeding them and you put your arm around me. And you told me I looked like myself for the first time in 3 years. Elena was crying now, not performing it the real kind, quiet and ugly, and coming from somewhere that wasn't available to manage. I know, she said. I know what I did. Who is the man? Celeste said. The one who approached you. Elena shook her head. I don't know his real name. I only ever had a number. Does the name Tommy Cass mean anything to you? A flicker across Elena's face. Small but there. You've met him, Celeste said, once. In person. Once, he said his name was. She stopped. He said his name was Thomas. Celeste picked up her phone. She called Damien. He answered in one ring. Tommy Cass approached Elena directly, she said. One in-season meeting. She has a number, a burner probably, but get it from her. She looked at her sister. She's going to give you everything she has. Elena stared at her. You're going to tell him everything, Celeste said to her. All of it. Every call, every question they asked, every answer you gave. Every detail of that night and every night after. Celeste, if you don't, then whatever Russo does to you when this unravels, and it will unravel, you'll face it without anyone. She said it without cruelty. Just as a fact. If you do, then at minimum you'll have the truth on your side. That's the only thing I can offer you right now. Elena looked at her for a long moment. Then she nodded. Small, like something collapsing inward. Celeste handed her the phone. She walked to the window while Elena talked. She didn't listen. She looked out at the street below, ordinary morning, ordinary city, garbage truck making its way down the block, a woman with a stroller navigating around a gap in the sidewalk, a man in a suit looking at his phone without watching where he was walking. All of it happening inside a world that had no idea what was happening in this apartment. She heard Elena's voice behind her, low and factual, the performance stripped away. She heard her give the number. She heard dates, times, the names she knew. She thought about the spare room, the fabric softener smell. Waking up at 6:15 and thinking that this was one of the most ordinary mornings she'd had in years. She had been the most surveilled she had ever been in her life, and she had mistaken it for freedom. She was on the street outside Elena's building, coat on, walking without a clear direction, when her phone rang. Marco, she answered, Mrs. Valenti. His voice had the tight quality again, controlled over something that was moving fast. Mr. Valenti needs you to know that Tommy Cass made a move this morning. An hour ago. He's been picked up. By police? No. By us. A pause. But there's something you need to know. When we got to him, he had documentation. On his phone. A recording. She stopped walking. Of what? Of a meeting. Between Mr. Valenti and 3 other men, 14 months ago. The recording is it's significant. If it goes to the wrong people. He stopped. Marco, she started walking again. Faster. Where's Damien right now? He's at the Wicker facility. He's asking for you. She flagged a cab. She got in. She gave the address without thinking about it, because some things operate below the level of decision, and right now everything was happening too fast for the luxury of deliberation. In the cab, she called Damien directly. Tommy had a recording, she said, before he could speak. I know, of 14 months ago. I know. His voice was flat in a way she hadn't heard before. The operational mode was still there, but it was running under something heavier. It's a situation I can manage, but it accelerates the timeline. Russo's going to know we have Tommy within hours, and when he does. He moves, she said, yes. The cab was navigating morning traffic. She watched the city sliding past the windows. What do you need? A pause. She could almost hear him recalibrating, not expecting that question. Not from her, not today. I need you not to be anywhere that Russo can find you, he said. After this morning, with Elena, he's going to know the channel is burned, she said. Yes, I understand that. Which means you're not useful to him as leverage anymore. Which means I become a liability. Yes. She kept her voice even. So he'll want to close it. I'm not going to let that happen, Damien said, and the 4 words came out of him in a way that had nothing performed in them at all. I know, she said. She hung up. The cab pulled up to the Wicker facility. She paid and got out, and the man at the front desk was already moving to bring her back before she reached the counter. She walked down the hall that she had walked down once before and pushed open the door at the end. The room had more people in it this time. Marco, a man she recognized as one of Damien's lawyers. Two others she didn't know who had the particular stillness of people who were there for physical reasons rather than legal ones. Damien was standing at the window. He turned when she came in. He looked at her for a second, just a second, and something in his face did what it had done outside Elena's building that evening, the small visible thing that wasn't armor. "Everyone out," he said. The room cleared. The lawyer looked like he wanted to object and chose not to. The door closed. They were alone. "Tell me what the recording has," she said. "A meeting between me and 3 men about a distribution arrangement. The arrangement involved moving product through channels that were illegal in ways that create federal exposure." He said it directly. "No management. If Russo delivers that recording to the right authority, I'm looking at something I can't buy my way out of." "How long has he had it?" "He's had it for at least 10 months, based on what Tommy told us." "He's been holding it," she said, "keeping it for the right moment." Which is now, he said. "Because his inside man is gone, his information channel through Elena is gone, and he has nothing left to use except the one thing he's been saving." She stood in the middle of the room and thought. "What are your options?" she said. "Find the original recording and destroy it before it goes anywhere. Or get ahead of it, which means going to someone federal first on my terms, with a negotiation already in place." "Neither of those is clean, no." She looked at him. "The negotiation. What does that involve?" He was quiet for a moment. "It involves giving information about other people's operations in exchange for a certain amount of protection for my own. You cooperate, in a specific and limited way, with the right people and the right terms." He paused. It's not something I ever thought I'd consider." "But you're considering it now." "Yes." She crossed to the chair at the side of the room and sat down. She leaned forward, elbows on her knees, and looked at the floor for a moment and then back up at him. "If you go that route," she said, "what happens to the organization?" "It gets smaller. Some things get restructured. Some operations get closed down." He paused. "Some people who've worked for me for a long time take losses. And you? I survive. Legally, I lose some territory. I lose some of the people I've relied on, but I survive." She thought about it. She thought about Tommy Cass in some back room with Marco standing over him. She thought about Elena at that small table, hands pressed together, saying, "I know what I did." She thought about Russo holding a 14-month-old recording and waiting patiently for exactly this moment. "He's going to move today," she said. "Russo, if he knows Tommy is gone." "Yes, which means you have hours less." "Then stop talking to me and make the call," she said. Something moved across his face. "You think I should cooperate," he said. "I think you should do what you need to do to not go to federal prison," she said. "I think I am not in a position to tell you what that means for your business or the people in it. But I think if Russo gets that recording to the right desk before you make a move, every option disappears." She paused. "That's not me telling you what to do. That's me telling you what I see." He looked at her for a long moment. "Why are you helping me?" he said. "I'm not helping you," she said it plainly. "I'm in this. I've been in it this whole time, whether I was in that house, or in Elena's spare room, or in a hotel counting ceilings. My name is in that recording, isn't it?" A pause. "Peripherally." "Then I'm in this," she said. "So, make the call." He moved. She watched him cross to the door and say something to Marco. She heard the shift in energy outside the room, people moving faster, phones coming out. The particular acceleration of a decision being made and implemented. She sat in the chair and she breathed. She thought about the fact that she had come here, had gotten in a cab and come here without deciding to, and was now sitting in a room, helping the man she had left 3 weeks ago navigate the worst moment of his professional life. She thought about what that meant about her, and what it didn't mean, and whether those two things could coexist without her, losing the thread of what she had been building toward. She thought about Patricia Dowd, and the legal pad, and the box from the back of the closet. She thought about Sylvia's voice on the phone, and the specific relief of it. She thought about what Elena had said it can be both things, and how she had said it can't, and whether she was right. She was still sitting there 20 minutes later when Marco came to the door. There's a car outside, he said. Mr. Valenti needs you to move locations. Where is he? Making the call. There's a man he uses for this kind of communication. It has to be in person. Marco's face was doing the thing it did when a situation had gone past the edge of what he'd planned for. Mrs. Valenti, we have a problem. She stood up. What? Russo's people have been seen 2 blocks from this location. They moved faster than we expected. She looked at him steadily. Then we move faster too. Marco nodded once. He opened the door wider. She walked out into the hall that smelled like antiseptic and institutional carpet. And she moved quickly, without running, because running told people around you that the situation was worse than you were letting on, and she was not going to be the thing that told people that. She was 3 steps from the side exit when the door at the end of the hall opened. Not Marco's man. Not anyone she'd seen in this building. 2 men she didn't recognize, in clothes that were trying to be ordinary, with the particular blank efficiency of people who had been told what to do and were doing it. She stopped. The man closest to her looked at her with the flat assessment of someone confirming an identification. Mrs. Valenti, he said, and it wasn't a greeting. She looked at him without moving. Her heart was going very fast in a way she was not going to let reach her face. You're in the wrong building, she said. He took a step toward her, and from behind her she heard Marco's voice sharp and short, and the hall went loud all at once, with the compressed chaos of people moving fast in a small space, and she stepped hard left against the wall, the way she had been taught exactly once. By a man Damien employed, who had explained it was the single most useful thing a person standing in a hallway could know. And the next 4 seconds were all sound and motion, and the particular violence of a situation that had stopped being theoretical. She was not hit. She was not touched. But she was standing in a hallway in a private medical facility in Chicago, watching 2 men from Richard Russo's organization go down under Marco's people, and she understood with complete and physical clarity that the distance she had been trying to put between herself and this world and this had just collapsed to 0. The hall went quiet. Marco appeared at her shoulder. Are you hurt? He said. No, she said. We need to move now. Where's Damien? In the car. He knows. Her phone rang. Damien, she answered. Tell me you're not hurt, he said, and his voice had shed every layer down to something she had not heard from him. Since the early years, raw, unguarded, a man whose machinery had stopped working, and what was underneath had come completely to the surface. I'm not hurt, she said. Get to the car, he said. Get in the car right now, and I'll explain everything. Please. She looked at Marco. Marco was already moving toward the exit, hand out, waiting. She walked. She pushed through the side door into the November cold, into a morning that had gone sharp and overbright, the way mornings do when adrenaline has opened everything up, and Marco's hand was on her arm guiding her to a car she didn't recognize at the curb, and she got in the back seat, and the door closed, and the car moved immediately. Damien was in the front seat. He turned to look at her from the passenger side, twisting his whole body around to see her, and she saw in his face something that she had never seen there before in 14 years, and that she did not have a clean word for, because it was not one thing. It was the compound expression of a man who had understood, in the last 4 seconds, what it would mean to lose something he had been treating as permanent. I've got a meeting in 20 minutes, he said. Federal. It's set. Marco made the call. He didn't stop looking at her. After the meeting, Russo is going to be the one managing a problem. Not us. She looked back at him. The car was moving through Chicago morning traffic, anonymous, unremarkable from outside. Inside it was 2 people in 14 years, and everything that had happened in 3 weeks, and a question that neither of them had answered yet about what came after all of this landed wherever it was going to land. Okay, she said, Celeste. He said her name the way he had in the kitchen, that first morning rough, stripped of the management he usually applied to everything. I need to know I'm here, she said. I'm right here. He held her gaze for 3 full seconds. Then he turned back to face forward, and the city moved around the car, and, somewhere across Chicago, Richard Russo was about to find out that the moment he had been building toward for 14 months had just closed in his face, and Damien Valenti was about to walk into a federal meeting that would cost him things he had spent his whole life building. And Celeste was sitting in the back of a car she hadn't chosen, heading toward an outcome she hadn't planned, understanding that she was about to find out what was left, when all the structures finally came down at once. The federal building on Dearborn was the kind of place that had been designed to make you feel small before you said a word. Celeste had been in it once before, years ago, for something unrelated to Damien, a licensing matter for a nonprofit she'd briefly been involved with, administrative and unremarkable. She remembered the lobby's particular combination of institutional marble and fluorescent light. The way sound moved differently in spaces designed for the processing of accountability. She sat in the car outside while Damien went in. Marco was in the driver's seat. Neither of them spoke for the first 10 minutes. The street outside was ordinary government district activity people with lanyards, a food cart doing steady business, a courier on a bike weaving through the noon traffic. "How long will it take?" she said. "Depends on who's in the room," Marco said. "Could be an hour. Could be 3. She nodded. She thought about what Damien had looked like walking into that building. He had straightened his coat at the door, a small automatic gesture, the kind a person makes when they're preparing to be seen as something specific. But he hadn't looked back at the car. She had expected him to look back. He hadn't. She wasn't sure yet what that meant. At the 90-minute mark, Marco got a call. He listened more than he spoke, said 2 words, hung up. "It's going," he said. "That's good or bad. It's going means it hasn't fallen apart yet." She looked back out the window. She thought about Elena. She had not spoken to her sister since she'd handed her the phone and walked to the window. She had no clear picture of what Elena was now, where she fit in anything, not because the love had disappeared, but because love and understanding were 2 different rooms, and she was standing in the hallway between them, not yet ready to open either door. She thought about Russo, whether he knew yet that his men hadn't come back from the Wicker facility, whether he was already managing his own version of a situation accelerating past his control. At 2 hours and 12 minutes, Damien came out of the building. He walked to the car with the same stride he always had measured, deliberate, nothing wasted. But something in the set of his shoulders was different. Not broken. More like a man who had put something down that he'd been carrying for a long time and was adjusting to the absence of the weight. He got in the front seat. He sat for a moment without speaking. "Done?" Marco said. "Done," Damien said. He turned to look at Celeste in the back seat. His face was tired in a specific way, not the sleeplessness of the last week, but something deeper. The kind of tired that comes from having said true things out loud in a room full of people who were writing them down. Russo's organization gets handed to the relevant authorities inside of 72 hours, he said. The recording is part of what's being dealt with. My exposure on it gets managed, in exchange for what I gave them, which was 14 years of knowing where things are. He said it plainly. Names, structures, the channels that move money and the people who run them. Not just Russo, others. A pause. "It's done. I can't undo it." "Are you okay?" she said. He looked at her. "No, but I will be." He turned back to face forward. "Marco, take her wherever she needs to go." "I'm not going anywhere yet," Celeste said. Both men were still for a second. "I want to talk to you," she said to Damien. "Not in this car. Somewhere we can sit down." They went to a diner 8 blocks from the federal building, because Celeste chose it specifically for being the kind of place nobody from either of their worlds would think to look. Corner booth, laminate menus, a waitress who refilled coffee automatically and didn't make eye contact unless you needed something. They ordered because not ordering felt conspicuous. Damien got coffee and didn't touch it. Celeste got soup she didn't eat. The diner sounds moved around them, the clatter of the kitchen, the low television above the counter showing a muted news program, 2 men at the far end of the room talking about something with a lot of gesturing. Celeste wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "I want to know about Dana," she said. Damien looked at her. "Not because I'm reopening that wound right now," she said. "Because I need to understand the whole thing. You said it had been 6 weeks. Was it emotional or was it was 6 weeks?" he said. "It wasn't. I wasn't in love with her. I want to be honest with you about that rather than making it worse, by pretending there was more to it than there was." He paused. "That doesn't make it better." "I know that, but you asked?" "Why?" she said. He looked at the table. "Because I was lonely in a way I didn't know how to say to you, and I made the worst possible choice in response to that." He looked up. "That's the true version. No more elaborate than that. You were lonely. We had been not there for a long time. Both of us. I know that was partly my doing, mostly my doing. But I stopped trying to reach you and started going around the problem instead, which is..." He stopped. which is what I do. With everything. I manage around problems instead of through them. She looked at him. I know, she said. I'm not asking you to forgive that today. Good. Because I can't today. He nodded. What I can tell you, she said slowly, is that I went back through the last 3 years in my head while I was in Elena's spare room, and I have to own my part of the distance, too. I stopped asking for what I needed. I got very quiet and very competent, and I made our life functional in ways that looked like everything was fine from the outside. And I didn't tell you when I was disappearing, because I had convinced myself it was better than the alternative. Which was, having the actual conversation. She held his gaze. I was afraid of what you'd do with it, whether you'd hear me or manage me. So I managed myself instead and called it coping. He was quiet. That doesn't make what you did acceptable, she said. I want to be clear about that. I'm not spreading the blame around to make the accounting easier. I understand. But I'm also not going to tell the story of the last 14 years as if I was entirely a passive thing that happened to, she said. I made choices. Some of them were wrong. He looked at her with something careful and attentive in his face, the look, she realized, that she had described to herself at the beginning of everything, as him finding her interesting. She had thought that look had been gone for years. She wasn't sure what it meant that it was here now. What happens with Russo? She said, shifting. He's going to spend the next week watching his organization dismantle. By the time his lawyers figure out the angle, there won't be much left to protect. Damien's voice was matter-of-fact. He'll move on me legally if he can, but what I gave the federal people insulates me from the specific exposure the recording created. It's not clean, but it's survivable. And Tommy Cass. Tommy is a federal problem now. He made choices and they have consequences. Elena, she said. Damien was quiet for a moment. Elena is your decision, he said. She was used and she participated. Both things are true. I'm not going to make that call for you. I know. She looked at her soup. She's still my sister. I know she is. I'm furious at her. I know. And I love her anyway, and she stopped. That's not a resolution. That's just the truth of it. Sometimes that's all there is, he said. She looked at him. Outside, a bus went past the diner window, big and slow, momentarily darkening the glass. The waitress came and refilled their coffee without asking and moved on. I'm not moving back into the house, Celeste said. Damien didn't flinch. Okay, not yet. Maybe not. I don't know what not yet means in terms of actual time. But I need you to hear that clearly and not treat it as a negotiating position. I hear it. I need to live in a place that's mine, she said. That I chose, that I pay for. That doesn't have 14 years of someone else's decisions in the walls. She paused. I need to know what I am when I'm not the mafia boss's wife. I've been that for so long I'm not sure I know anymore. You were something before me, he said. I know. I'm trying to remember what. He looked at her steadily. I watched you in that hallway at Wicker today. After Marco's people dealt with Russo's men. You didn't shake. You walked out that side door like you'd planned to. He paused. That wasn't the mafia boss's wife. That was you. She absorbed that. That's the most useful thing you've said to me in 3 years, she said. Something moved across his face that was almost a smile. Not quite, but in the neighborhood. I have a lot of ground to make up, he said. Yes, she said. You do, she called Elena from the diner parking lot while Damien settled the check. Elena answered on the first ring. I'm not ready to see you, Celeste said. I want you to know I know that, and I'm not pretending otherwise. I understand. Elena's voice was stripped down, quiet in the way a person gets when they've been crying for hours and run out of the energy that crying requires. I need time, Celeste said, real time, not a week. I don't know how long. Okay, I need you to do something for me in the meantime, Celeste said. Anything. Don't explain yourself to me. Don't write me a letter. Don't ask mutual people to tell me things about how you're doing or how sorry you are. Just be somewhere quiet and think about what actually happened and why you made every choice you made, and don't give me the managed version when we eventually talk. She paused. I need the unmanaged version. I need the true one. A long silence. Okay, Elena said, and Elena, yeah. I'm not done with you, Celeste said. I want you to hear that. I'm not done with you, and that is not the same as forgiving you. But it's what I have right now, and I think you should know it. She heard her sister breathe. Thank you, Elena said very quietly. Celeste hung up. Damien was standing a few feet away, giving her space, hands in his coat pockets. He hadn't tried to listen. She appreciated that. Marco can take you wherever you want to go, he said. I know. She looked at him. I'm going to find an apartment. This week. Okay. I'm going to call Sylvia. Get back some of the things I let go of. Good. And I'm going to call Patricia Dowd and tell her to pause on everything, because the situation has changed and I need to reassess what I actually want before I make anything legal or permanent. He went very still. That's not a promise, she said immediately. I need you to hear that. I'm not promising anything. I hear you. It's just I'm not going to make permanent decisions in the middle of the most chaotic month of my life, she said. That's just sense. It is, he said. She looked at him for a moment. At the bruise on his face, still there, going yellow at the edges now. At the cut above his eye healing. At the man underneath all of it, not the mafia boss, not the apparatus of control and reputation she had married into, just the person, imperfect and specific and tired, in a way that was actually aging him in front of her. You have to restructure, she said, after what you gave them today. The organization gets smaller, significantly. Are you going to be okay with that? He thought about it, which surprised her. She had expected an immediate yes, the reflexive reassurance. Instead, he stood there and actually thought about it. I'll have to be, he said finally. Some of what I built didn't make me better. It just made me larger. There's a difference. He paused. I'm going to have to learn that difference for real now. That's going to be hard. Yes. Harder than you think, she said. Probably. She nodded. She pulled her coat tighter. Okay, she said. I'm going to go. Okay. She moved toward the car where Marco was waiting. She stopped when Damien said her name, not loud, just her name, the way he'd said it in the hallway that first morning when she'd walked out with her bag, the way he'd said it at the clinic, all the versions of her name in his voice, across 14 years stacked up in the single syllable. She turned. Thank you, he said, for today, for coming. For all of it, she looked at him. Don't thank me for today, she said. Today happened because a man named Russo spent 14 months building a trap using my life as the mechanism. I didn't come today as a gift to you. I came because it was my fight too. I know, he said. I'm thanking you anyway. She held his gaze for 3 seconds. Then she got in the car. She found an apartment in 10 days. It was on the 6th floor of a building on the near north side. 3 rooms, windows that faced east, so the morning light came in clean and direct. The kitchen was smaller than she was used to, and the bathroom had a radiator that knocked in the night, and the closet in the bedroom was not going to be adequate for everything she owned. She took it because standing in the empty living room, on the day the rental agent showed it to her, she felt something she identified carefully before she trusted it. She felt like herself. She called Sylvia from the empty apartment, sitting on the floor with her back against the wall because there was no furniture yet. I found a place, she said. Finally, Sylvia's voice was warm and dry in equal measure. Do you need help moving? I don't have anything to move yet. I have a box and a bag and a legal pad. That's very austere of you. I'm starting from scratch. Good, Sylvia said. That's exactly right. She got off the phone and sat in the empty apartment for a while, just being in it. The radiator knocked. The east light was going flat as the afternoon moved on. Somewhere below her someone was cooking something that smelled like garlic and oil, and she realized she was hungry for the first time in days in a way that was uncomplicated and direct. She was going to get dinner. She was going to walk to whatever was on the corner and sit at a table that wasn't anyone else's table and eat something she hadn't had to negotiate or plan around anyone. Small thing. She was going to hold on to the small things. She saw Damien once in the first month. Not planned. She was coming out of a coffee place on Michigan with Sylvia mid-morning, and he was on the sidewalk across the street, not walking toward her. Just there, the coincidence of a city that was large but not infinite. He saw her at the same moment she saw him. He stopped. Sylvia, who had heard most of the story by that point and had opinions she was mostly keeping to herself, said nothing. Just held her coffee cup. Across the street, Damien raised one hand. Not a wave. Just an acknowledgement. Here, I see you. I'm not going to make this into something. Celeste raised her hand back. They held it for a second, not long, not dramatic. Just 2 people on opposite sides of a Chicago street in December, acknowledging each other's existence in a city they both still lived in. Then he walked on. Sylvia waited. Don't, Celeste said. I wasn't going to say anything. You were going to ask how I feel. I was going to ask if you want another coffee. Celeste looked at the place where Damien had been for one more second. Then she turned and walked with her friend toward the corner. Yes, she said, I want another coffee. Patricia Dowd's office looked the same. Celeste sat across from her in January, a Tuesday, 3 weeks into the new year, and she said, I want to talk about what I actually want. Not what I'm reacting to. Not what makes legal sense from a protective standpoint. What I actually want, as specifically as I can say it. Patricia folded her hands on the desk. Go ahead. I want to stay married. She said it the way she'd been practicing saying it to herself directly, without apology, without softening. I want to stay married and rebuild it on completely different terms. And if those terms can't be met, then I'll reconsider. But that's where I'm starting from. What are the terms? I live in my apartment for at least a year. Not because I'm punishing him. Because I need to know I can exist fully in a life that's mine before I share a life again. She paused. I need him to do the restructuring of his organization that he agreed to, and I need to see that it's real and not a performance. I need full honesty about finances, not access to things that expose me legally, but honesty about the shape of things. She paused again. And I need him to see a therapist. Patricia's expression didn't change, but something behind it registered the last item. He agreed to that, she said. He hasn't yet? I haven't asked him yet. Celeste looked at her steadily. I'm telling you first, so that when I ask him, I already know what I'm asking for. And if he refuses, then we find out what that refusal means. She paused. I don't think he'll refuse, but I need to know I asked clearly enough that the answer is a real answer. Patricia picked up her pen. You understand that none of this is legally binding without documentation. I understand. I'm not asking for a contract. I'm asking you to hear it so someone other than me knows what I said I wanted before I said it to him. Patricia nodded. I hear it. Celeste sat back in her chair. Through the window behind Patricia, the lake was gray-blue and winter flat, the city's edge meeting the water with the particular indifference of January. She looked at it and thought about the legal pad she'd started in Elena's spare room, the pages of practical accounting, what she had, what she needed, what 6 months could look like, and she thought about how much had been different from every plan she'd made. Not worse, just different. In the way that life is when it insists on being specific rather than the shape you drew in advance. She called Damien on a Wednesday evening in late January. He answered the way he always answered her now. On the second ring, no preamble, just waiting. I want to have dinner, she said. Not at the house. Somewhere neutral. I have things I want to say to you in person. When Friday 7, you picked the place. A pause. Okay, Damien. What? Nothing formal, just dinner. Okay, he said again, and there was something in the way he said it that told her he understood it was not okay in the small sense, but okay in the larger sense. The sense of I am going to meet you where you are instead of where I want you to be. She hung up. She sat in her apartment, the one with the east light and the inadequate closet and the radiator that knocked, and she thought about 14 years and 3 months and everything in between, and she thought, with the particular honesty she had been practicing since November, that she still didn't know exactly how this would resolve. That was the truth. The ending she was living was not the kind that announces itself cleanly. It was the kind that reveals itself through continued choices, through the day-by-day construction of something new that might hold or might not, depending on whether both people doing the building were actually building the same thing. Was going to find out. That was what she had, not certainty. Not the guaranteed reunion, not the clean departure. Just the willingness to find out. On a Friday in February, Elena knocked on the door of the apartment. Celeste had known she was coming. They had worked up to it slowly, first a text, then a phone call, then 2 more phone calls, Elena giving her the unmanaged version the way Celeste had asked for, talking for 2 hours on a Sunday night about things she had not said to anyone. Not the narrative version, not the self-protective version, the actual version. It was worse than Celeste had expected in some ways, and more comprehensible in others. Elena had been afraid. She had made the first choice from a place of genuine desperation, and every subsequent choice from the trap that the first one built. None of that excused it. But Celeste had spent enough time with the shape of it to stop needing it to be simpler than it was. Elena stood in the doorway with her coat on, and a container of something she'd cooked because Elena cooked when she didn't know what else to do with her hands. Celeste looked at her. Her sister looked like she'd aged. Not dramatically, but there was something in her face that hadn't been there before. A weight that had settled and wasn't going anywhere. Celeste thought that was probably right, that some costs should show. "Come in," Celeste said. Elena came in. She looked around the apartment. She didn't comment on it, which was the right call. They went to the kitchen. Elena put the container on the counter. Celeste got plates. They ate standing at the kitchen counter because there were only 2 chairs and they were in the other room, and neither of them moved to get them. They ate and they talked about small things first. The building, the radiator, the coffee place on the corner that Celeste had decided was the best within walking distance. Small things. The domestic texture of a life. Then Elena said, "I don't know how to fix what I did." "You can't fix it," Celeste said. "It's done. You can only do something different going forward." "I want to do something different." "I know." Celeste set down her fork. "I believe you. That doesn't mean I'm back to where we were." "I don't know if we can get back to where we were. Can we get somewhere new?" Celeste looked at her sister. At the face she had known her entire life, not the face she thought she'd known this past year, but the one underneath all of that, which was still the face of her sister. And love is not a clean instrument, and it does not work the way fairness works. "Yes," she said. "I think we can get somewhere new." Elena breathed a long, slow breath. "Okay," she said. "It's going to take time." "I know. Real time. Not a few months." "I know. And if you ever—" Celeste stopped. "If there's ever again a situation where you're in something you can't get out of, you call me first. Not after 6 months first, whatever it is." "Yes," Elena said. "I mean that. I know you do." Elena looked at her. "I'm sorry, Celeste. I know that's not—" "It's okay," Celeste said. "It's not okay in the complete sense, but it's going to have to be okay enough to start from." Elena nodded. They finished eating. They washed the plates. They talked for another hour about things that were partly small and partly not, feeling the new shape of each other out, what was still there, what had changed, what would need to be rebuilt slowly and carefully, over more time than either of them could currently measure. When Elena left, Celeste stood at the door and watched her walk to the elevator, and then went back inside and stood in her kitchen. The radiator knocked twice. She looked around the apartment, her 3 rooms, her east light, her legal pad on the kitchen table, with the pen still beside it. She picked up the pen. She started a new page. Not a list this time. Not accounting or planning or the practical mapping of resources and risks. She just wrote, in her own handwriting, the thing that had been true this whole time, and that she had been working her way toward being able to say plainly. She was still here. She had walked into the worst thing, and it had not been the end of her. The ground had shifted. The walls had come down. The people she trusted had proven to be more complicated than she'd let herself see. And she had stood in hallways and hotel rooms, in the back seats of unfamiliar cars, and she had not become someone else. She had become, if anything, more completely herself. That was what you got, on the other side of something like this. Not resolution in the clean sense. Not a restored version of the life before. What you got was the knowledge of what you were made of, tested, confirmed, sometimes ugly, sometimes stronger than you'd expected, and the understanding that the life ahead would be built by the person that knowledge revealed, rather than the quieter, smaller version, who had been shrinking imperceptibly for 3 years, and calling it management. She set down the pen. She went to the window. The east light was gone by now. This was February evening, dark by 5:30. The city laid out below in its ordinary lit pattern, every window someone else's life in progress. Tomorrow she had dinner with Damien. She didn't know what it would produce. She knew what she was going to say. She knew the terms she was walking in with, and she knew she was going to hold them, and she knew that holding them was not going to be simple or painless or quick. She also knew that she was going to the dinner because she wanted to, not because she was afraid of the alternative, not because walking away was too hard, not because 14 years had worn grooves so deep she couldn't step out of them. She was going because she had looked at the thing clearly, in all its actual dimensions, and decided it was worth trying to rebuild. On different terms, as different people partially. She stood at the window until the city outside had fully settled into its winter night, and then she turned on the lights in her apartment, her lights, her choice, and went to find something to read. And the radiator knocked once, and the east window went dark, and Celeste Hayes stood in the middle of a life that was only just beginning to belong completely to her. She read for an hour without retaining much of it. The book was something Sylvia had pressed into her hands at their last coffee, literary fiction, the kind with sentences that required a second reading to fully land. Normally she liked that. Tonight her eyes moved across the lines, and her brain processed the words at the surface level and didn't take them down any further because some part of her was still sitting with everything else. She put the book face down on the kitchen table. She made tea. She stood at the stove while the water heated, and she thought about the dinner tomorrow and about what it meant that she was nervous. Not the anxious nervous of someone walking into something they didn't want. The other kind. The kind that lives in the body when something actually matters, and the body knows it before the mind has finished catching up. She poured the tea. She sat at the kitchen table with both hands around the cup, and she let herself think about Damien without organizing the thoughts. Without the legal pad, without the framework of terms and conditions she had been building around every consideration of him since November. Just thinking about him, the way you think about someone when the guard comes down after the house goes quiet. She thought about the federal building and the way he'd walked out of it, that particular shift in his shoulders, the thing she'd identified as a man putting something down that he'd been carrying too long. She thought about the diner and him actually thinking before he answered whether he would be okay with losing the size of what he'd built, instead of reassuring her automatically. She thought about him not looking back at the car when he walked into that building, which had felt at the time like he was pulling away, which she now understood differently. He hadn't looked back because looking back was asking for something, and he had committed in that moment to not asking. That was new. That was not the Damien of 3 years ago or 5 years ago. That was not the man who had sat in the kitchen with his hands around a chair, which had been real but had also been underneath it. Still the instinct toward pulling her back in, toward making her see what he needed her to see. The man who had walked into that building without looking back had decided something. She wasn't sure he'd articulated it to himself yet, but she had seen it in his body and she trusted what she saw. She finished the tea. She rinsed the cup. She went to bed at a reasonable hour for the first time in weeks, and she slept without counting anything. Friday came in cold and bright, the particular clear quality of a February morning that has decided to be cold, honestly, rather than gray and heavy about it. She got up and made coffee and stood at the east window while the light came in, and she thought, this is a good window. I made a good choice about this window. Small things. She was holding on to the small things. She dressed without overthinking it, not the clothes of a woman morphing something, not the armor of someone going into a negotiation, just what she wanted to wear, which was a dark sweater and good trousers, and the coat she had always liked best because it was warm without being seen stiff and she could move freely in it. She got a call from Marco at noon, Mrs. Valenti. He still called her that. She hadn't corrected it. She wasn't sure yet what she'd want to be called on the other side of whatever this was. Mr. Valenti asked me to confirm dinner tonight. It's confirmed, she said. He also asked me to tell you, and I'm delivering this exactly as he said it, that if you change your mind between now and 7 o'clock, there's no consequence. He said you should know that. She stood in her kitchen, holding the phone. Tell him I'm not going to change my mind, she said. Yes, ma'am. She hung up. She stood there for a moment. He had asked Marco to call and deliver that message, which meant he'd thought about the possibility that she would second-guess herself, and his response to that possibility had been to remove the pressure from it, rather than counter it with reassurance. He had given her an exit and told her about it, not to seem magnanimous, because he understood finally, apparently, at significant cost, that exits were what she had needed and hadn't had, and he was going to make sure she knew the doors were where they were, now regardless of what she chose to walk through. She thought maybe he's learning. Then she thought, that's a long way from the same thing as having learned. She kept both thoughts and went about her day. The restaurant was a place she didn't know on the west side, small, not expensive, the kind of place that was genuinely good rather than performing goodness through its decor. He had chosen well. She noticed that. He was already there when she arrived, which meant he'd been early, which meant he was more nervous than he was showing. He stood when she came in. Not performatively, just stood, the way a person does when they want the other person to know they were seen walking through the door. They sat, they ordered. The conversation started in the shallow end, how it was settling in, whether the neighborhood had everything she needed. He asked without using it as a way into something else. She answered without deflecting. Then she set down her fork and looked at him. I want to tell you what I want, she said. And I want you to listen to all of it before you respond to any of it. Okay, he said. She told him. The apartment for at least a year. The restructuring being real and not performed. The full honesty about the shape of his finances and operations going forward. The therapist. She watched his face through all of it. He listened. He didn't interrupt. When she reached the therapist part, something moved in his expression, not resistance, more like a man confronting a door he'd been walking past without opening for a very long time. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. The therapist, he said, yes. Is that he stopped? Started again. I'm not saying no. I'm asking if you mean a specific kind of thing or just someone to talk to. Someone to talk to, she said, someone who isn't me. Someone whose entire job is to help you figure out why you make the choices you make so you can make different ones. She paused. You don't have to report to me about it. I'm not asking to supervise it. I just need to know you're doing it. He nodded slowly. Okay, he said. That's a real okay? He met her eyes. I've been talking to someone since December, he said. Started after the federal meeting. I didn't tell you because I didn't want it to seem like I was... He paused. I didn't want it to seem like I was doing it for you. She stared at him. You started in December, she said. Yes, on your own. Yes, she sat with that. Why didn't you tell me, she said. Because it needed to be mine first, he said. Because everything I've ever done that was supposed to fix something between us, I did it toward you. At you for you to see. He held her gaze steadily. I needed to do one thing that was just mine. That didn't have an audience. Even you. The restaurant around them was doing its quiet Friday evening business, other tables, other conversations, the low movement of a room full of people being ordinary together. Celeste looked at the man across from her. She thought about a woman who had stood in a doorway 11 seconds too long watching the wrong thing, and had walked out, and had spent 3 months finding her way back to herself through the rubble of what that walk had uncovered. She thought about legal pads and hotel ceilings and the east window in an apartment that was hers. She thought about Elena's face in the doorway with a container of food and the specific forgiveness that wasn't forgiveness yet, but was the beginning of a road that might get there. She thought about what it meant to love someone imperfectly across a long time, and to keep finding out that the story wasn't over yet, and that not being over wasn't the same as being all right. But that being all right wasn't actually the destination she had been moving toward. The destination was being real, being fully herself inside a life she had chosen with open eyes. She picked up her fork. Tell me about December, she said. What made you start? And Damien Valenti, who had spent 20 years being a man that other men were afraid of, looked across a small table in a West Side restaurant at the woman who had walked out of his house and walked back into her own life and earned every inch of the ground she was standing on, and he started talking. Not managing, not performing, just talking. And Celeste listened, and the night moved on around them, and outside the city did what it always did, enormous and indifferent, and full of the 10,000 ordinary lives that had nothing to do with any of this, and inside, 2 people sat across from each other in the unspectacular light of a Friday evening and did the hardest thing either of them had ever attempted, which was to be honest about who they actually were and trust that the other person was still in the room.